Good evening, everybody.
Kabotov, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. Okay. So we're starting with Vav today. And it says in the Beit Yosef, Katav Aran, says the Ran, שנשאל על החיטים שנמצאו בהם חיטים מבוקעות. He was also asked about wheat. They found in the wheat there, some of them are cracked. ואפשר שהביקוע ההיא אינו מחמת מים, אלא מחמת הלכה, היוצאת מהשבישלים בעודנו בגדיש. Right, מהשיבולים בעודנו בגדיש. So he says, right, that it's possible that this cracking is not because of water. Rather, it's because of the moisture that comes out of the grain while it's still standing in the field. So the question is, right, is that a problem or not? So he answers the Ran, so he says, the truth is, he says, I don't find any way to be lenient regarding, right, wheat which is cracked. So he says, regarding the other wheat, which is, together with that, which is not cracked, so he says there it's allowed, right? And that's very similar to what we said yesterday in the name of the Rashba, very similar. So he says, why are they allowed? Because he says this matter, Matsui Shabashat Geshamim, it says it's very common that the time of the rain, right? Elionot Shagadish Tachtono Mitchametz Mitbakea. So what happens is, right, it says that the top of the pile, as we said yesterday, right, tends to get wet and crack. But as we said yesterday, same thing, the water doesn't permeate inside into the lower levels. Klal, at all, he says. Interesting, at all. So he says, therefore, there's no reason to forbid the inner layers, right? Only the outer layer is the problem. So now another question comes up, that follows from this, which is, can I take the whole mixture, of wheat which is cracked and wheat which is not cracked, and grind it up together? Mishum bitul isur lechatchila, right? So there is a prohibition here, could be, right, because you're not allowed to nullify lechatchila these things. In other words, if it got nullified, yes, you can use it, but you shouldn't go ahead and nullify it yourself. That's So what about that? Mishum bitul isur lechatchila. So he says, this I cannot be lenient, right? To nullify it lechatchila, to go ahead and nullify it yourself, actively nullify it. So he says, so it says, regarding the wheat which is in your house, so he says you can grind that before Passover. ולהשותן לגויים, נמי שלא עשו כן אלא בדבר שאין יצרו מוכיח בתוכו. So he says you can save that for goyim, he says. Two different things, right? He's telling you, first of all, that you're allowed to grind that, whatever is in the house. What's the difference, by the way, if it's in the house or it's outside? Because outside there's rain, right? In the house there's no rain, so it's much safer, So the assumption is that it's not leavened. That's why the difference. So he says, מותר לטחון קודם פסח ולהשותן לגויים נמי שלא אסרו כן אלא בדבר. So he says also, you can save it for the goyim, he says. What does that mean? Because they didn't forbid this, אלא בדבר שאין יסרו מוכיח מתוכו. Only something which, right, the prohibition is not apparent there. But he says, in a case like this, that it's recognizable, right? That it's cracked. And it got, says it got publicized in your city. Mistabra de share. So there it's allowed, he says, right? It seems to be that it's allowed. Ad kanashano. Okay, so the last part of this tshuva is a little bit confusing. What is he allowing and what is he not allowing, right? But let's see the Shulchan Aruch, right, how he explains it. This way, right, we'll get a clearer picture. So says Shulchan Aruch like this. Right? So it says if you have wheat, right, which has, as we said, right, there's cracked wheat there inside your, right, wheat, your wheat pile, right, the pile of wheat, there's cracked stuff in there. So it says, right, the ones that are not cracked, mutarot, those are allowed, even though they're mixed up together, right? It's all one pile. מפני שהדבר מצוי שבשעת הגשמים העליונות הגדיש ותחתיתו מתחמץ ומתבקע, ואין המים נוגעים באמצעיתו כלל. So he says, right, that it's very common, he says, that what? When rains come down, right, outdoors, the upper layer will be a problem, because it got wet, and also the lower layer is problem as well, right? So why the lower layer? Because it's like the lower layer soaks in the rain, right, which is on the ground. So you have the upper layer and the lower layer, which are problematic, but the middle layers, right, he says, are okay. So he says the water doesn't get into the middle layers, so those are okay. Interesting. All right, so there you go. So what is he talking about here? He's talking about wheat, right? Which is, outside, outdoors. So what are we saying, right? Let's sum it up. What we're saying is like this, right? That if you have wheat outdoors and it got rained on, so the rule is, right, that top and bottom layer are a problem, but the middle layers are okay. So you have to separate them, and you can have the middle layers. You can use those. So as we said, right, in the Bet Yosef, if you want to grind them together and nullify them, so the Ran said, right, we shouldn't do that because you're not allowed to nullify lechatchila by yourself, right? Actively nullify it yourself. That you should not do. That's one thing. Yeah.
What does it mean that nullify by yourself?
What does that mean? That you mix it together, right? So this way, it's all like one. It's all like one package, right? So now it's nullified.
That you're allowed to do, but not on its.
You're not allowed to do, right? To mix it together, because you're actively nullifying it.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So, but here's a trick, right? how do you really nullify this? How do you do it? Because the truth is, right, that if you want to mix it up together, it's already mixed together as it is. So then what do you need to do to nullify it? That's the
Mix
question,
it to
right?
60.
I'm sorry?
I would take out the rotten part and then mix in whatever's left to make sure it's more than a 60th. Yeah.
Right, but the truth is, it is six. There is 60th, right? You have that. But the problem, right? The truth is, you don't even need 60th here. You just need majority.
Right.
Uh, it- why is that, by the way? Why don't you do 60th? Because the rule is in halacha like this, right? If you have a solid matter, okay, which is like one type of food, you don't need a 60th for that. Even majority nullifies it. So anyway, right, that's a different story, but I'm not going to get into that now. But that's a different discussion. But anyway, right, the point is, why? How do you nullify this? It's already mixed together as it is. So then, what's there to nullify?
It might taste different altogether if you mix it like that. You think it would taste funny.
Right, but that's not my question. My question is, how do you nullify it? Right? What do you do? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
The taste is the same, more or less. More. But the thing is like this, right? That the way you nullify it, we just saw in the Beit Yosef, right? In the Ran there, he said the way you nullify it is by grinding it up into flour. Why do you need to do that to nullify it? What's the reason why?
So you
The
don't see a
reason,
rotten.
I'm sorry.
So you don't see a rotten part, something that's obviously different than the rest of it.
Yeah, you're getting there. You're getting there. Right. The point is like this, right? That the rule is like this, that it doesn't really get nullified if you can still see it. If you can still see, right, the part which is forbidden, it's not nullified. You have to remove it. So the only way it gets nullified if you can't see it. And in order to make it unseeable, whatever, right, invisible, you got to grind it up into flour. So then it all looks the same. You can't tell the difference anymore. You understand? That's the whole thing. So therefore, right, the only way you can nullify this is to do that, right? To grind it up. This way, it all looks the same, right? You can't see it's cracked, not cracked, right? What are you going to see? There's no cracks in the flour, right? There's no cracks there. The crack is in the wheat. So, but anyway, right? The Ran said you should not do that. Why is that? Because you're not allowed to nullify actively something, right? Only if it got nullified, you can have it. By an act of God, whatever, or somebody else did it, right? Whatever. You didn't do it. Then you can eat it. But here, right, you're actively doing it, you cannot do that. By the way, I'll tell you a secret about that. Since we got to this, right? The secret is like this, right? If the mixture is prohibited from the Torah, you cannot nullify it actively. But if it's only permitted prohibited from the rabbis, you can actually actively nullify it, right? But here it's from the Torah. So therefore you can't do it. Okay, it's a different discussion, right? The nullification, mixtures, right? We have to go to the other part of the Shulchan Aruch to get into that stuff. We're not talking about that here, right? So much. Anyway, right? The point is that the Ran says don't nullify it. So, but on the other hand, he says, right, that if it's at home, it wasn't outdoors, and you saw some cracks there, whatever, right? He says that you can nullify. Why is that? Because he says, right, that we're not even sure if this stuff is chametz. It could be just, it's rotten or something, whatever. So there's no issue there at home because no water got on it, right? We don't know if any water got on it. The roof is not leaking, right? Your roof is okay; it's intact. So then there's no reason to assume, right, that there was water in there. So therefore, the rule is, right, if it's at home, the Ran says you can use the whole thing, no problem. But if it's outdoors, then it got rained on. So there, right, it's more like a sure thing. So you can't do it. Okay, that's pretty much the story there. Very good. So let's go on.
Kavod harav, if we nullify it at home, then is it allowed also because you're going to a double doubt?
So here's the thing, right? I'm not telling you that you can nullify it at home.
No.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter where you nullify it. What I'm telling you is that if the grain was stored in your house, you can nullify it.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It's not the same thing.
Okay. No. Thank you.
You get the point?
Yes.
Why is that? Because then we don't assume that it got wet, right? We have no reason to assume that. So then you can do what you want. But right, if it's outdoors, then you got a problem because it already got wet. Unless you live like in a very dry climate, right? Like in Israel, it doesn't rain in the summer. So, if you had your grain outside in the summer, it's not going to get wet. Right? So there's no problem. Depends on the situation, right? Obviously. Right? We're talking about you had rains, and it got wet. That's what we're talking about. Otherwise, then, right, if it wasn't like that, you're not even sure if it got wet, then there would be a double doubt, like you said, because you're not even sure if it got wet at all. Okay, whatever. There's all kinds of scenarios, we can get into, right? The different ways of looking at it, depending on the scenario. Okay, whatever, right? Each scenario has its own parameters, but that's the way it goes. Okay, good. So, right, that's the story there. Baruch Hashem, today, we don't really have a lot of these problems because everything is, bagged, and sealed. So, we don't have so much getting wet like in the old days. It was like that. Because in the old days, they would just leave it out, in the field, and it was like open to the elements, Probably even today we have that, in the farm, if you're talking about farmers and stuff. You still have that too. But if you're talking about, right, in the right, in your house or whatever, or in the stores, right, there everything is bagged and it's tight, whatever, it's closed. So not such a big problem like it used to be before. But right, you have to know what you're doing. But as we said, right, that the problem is when it comes to, I mentioned this before when we started these laws, that going to your local supermarket, right, and buying, your right, on the shelf flour is a problem because they wash it in the factory with water, right, the wheat. So because of that, it's already been like soaked in water, basically, So this is the reason why you can't just use, off the shelf flour for Passover. You have to get special flour. Kosher for Passover. That's what you need. Okay, good. So let's go on to the next one. Which is Zain. Yeah, so it looks like Zain we already did because it was also together with Gimel. So we did this already. So let's look at the Shulchan Aruch. So it says Shulchan Aruch like this, right? Israel sheyesh lo borot meleim chitim. Okay, so you have a Jew, right? And he's got, these like excavations, right, in his backyard somewhere. Right, he's got like a little farm there or whatever. And, he's got like, pits that he dug and he stores wheat in there. וחושש שמא יש בקרקעית הבור ובקירותיו חיטים מבוקעים מלאכות הבור בארץ, right? So he says, and there's concern that there's going to be some cracked wheat there, right? Why is that? So, apparently we're assuming, right, that he covered the pit, so it didn't get rained on. He's not going to leave it open, right? Obviously, the pit. But, right, the thing is that uh, there's moisture that comes out of the surface of the pit, right? Whether it's the walls, right, or the bottom of the pit, right? And there, the moisture comes out and, right, makes the wheat crack. So the question is, right, what's the rule regarding this mixture of wheat? What do we do with that? So, right, says the Maran Shulchan Aruch, bitul be'alma sage, right? So you can just, basically, right, nullify this. So, but if you remember, we talked about this yesterday, why you're allowed to do that. So, right, we talked about this at length, with the Rashba there. So the Rashba said, right, something to the effect of, something to the tune of, right, that it's like a double doubt there, we're not really sure what's going on. So therefore, right, we're not really concerned so much. So therefore, you're allowed to nullify it basically, right, and just use the whole thing. That's pretty much the story, if I'm not mistaken. So let me see what here. There is the Mishnah Berurah here, so let me just take a look at that for a second. See what he has to say. Okay. Yeah, so he says it's a double doubt, right? The Mishnah Berurah. Okay, right. So yeah. By the way, there are some people who haven't learned enough Torah. They don't know so much about halacha, and they think, double doubt. It's like something. They think it's only like it's only for Sephardim, or it's only for people who follow certain rabbis. But it's not true. The concept of double doubt is everywhere in halacha. Whether it's in the Talmud or even in the Mishnah Berurah, right? We see over here. So you shouldn't think, right, that double doubt is some kind of a taboo thing. You can't touch that. You can't use it. Whatever. It's not true. We do use it. We do touch it. It's a part of halacha. You can't escape from it. There are some people who are ignorant, who don't know these things, and they say, "Well, you can't use it. Why can't you use it? Because you don't know how to do it." Okay, so if you don't know how to use it, you don't use it. But the ones who do know how to use it, they do use it. Okay, whatever, right? That's the idea. So that's the reason why it's allowed, right? To nullify this thing. So what does that mean? As we said, right? How do you nullify it? Grind it up, right, into flour, and it's nullified. That's it. It's finished. Right? Why is that? Because it's not recognizable anymore, right? Which one was cracked, which one was not cracked? I don't know. What do I know? It all looks the same to me, right? So that's good enough. Okay, good. That's the idea. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll steam ahead. So now we're going to Chet, 8. Let's see what's going on there. Here we are. Okay, so we got to read the tour over here. Here it is. Okay, so it says like this, right? The two. Davash shel akum and machazikin bo isu, right? So what is he talking about here? Right? It's a sweet subject over here, right? Talking about honey, right? Honey that was made by goyim. So the question is, right? Are you allowed to use it for Passover? This is the question. So it says, right, that we don't assume that there's anything forbidden there, in the honey, right? So therefore, you just go to the store, you can buy goyish, honey, and use it for Passover. That's what he's saying, right? Lomar mezuyafu, right? So we don't assume, right, that it's some kind of a fake kind of thing there, the goy made like fake honey, right? Something, synthetic, whatever. God knows what, right? We don't assume that. So we assume that the honey is real, right? That's what he's trying to say. Okay, very simple. Why is that, by the way? Why do we assume that it's okay? So you know what the answer is, right? Giving you like a simple general answer. The rule is like this, right? That wherever it's not the derech, it's not the way of the goyim to do things like that. So then we don't assume that they did it, So it's kind of like a majority kind of thing. In other words, most of the goyim don't play these games, with honey. They don't make fake honey, and tell you it's real. So therefore, right, we have no reason to assume that they did that. That's the whole thing, right? It's not because we assume that the guy is honest. He's honest Joe, right? No, right? Especially our Joe, right? The president. He's not very honest, So, right? He's not a very honest guy. So we don't assume that, right? But it's just it's not the way for them to do that. So therefore, we don't assume that they did. Okay, so that's the story there. So let's see Bet Yosef, right? So it says Bet Yosef regarding that. Kachatav Hagot Maimon, right? It's also brought down Hagot Maimon b'Shem Ra'avan, in the name of the Ra'avan. In Psachim Ach b'Shem Ravia b'Rabbeinu Peretz, but he says there's also two other rabbis, right? These two. That what? So they forbid this, right? They say it's forbidden. The honey, right? The fish gilin le'arebo kemach. So it says, you know why it's forbidden? Because the goyim, put flour in there. Oh, right? Or solet, right? Or solet, right? Which is solet is like fine flour. Ach devash shemotziin min kaveret sheodin she'en bo tarob. But it says if you're bringing it out of the honeycomb, right? They take it out of the honeycomb. So then we don't assume, right, that they added flour to it. So that we can allow, But he said they say, right, that it's for it's proper to be stringent about this. Why is that? Because maybe it's going to get switched, whatever. They're going to pull some tricks on us, these goyim, right? Then we're going to get chametz honey, right? So we got to watch out for that. That's what they hold, right? Kakata Mordechai Perek Kol Shah. Also, Mordechai says this. So he says, right, says Bet Yosef, doesn't seem to agree with this, right? This stringent opinion here. So he says, you know what? He says, I'm not really sure. Like, I don't even know why they forbid this. Why is that? So he says, even if you know for sure, right, that they put flour in there, let's say, in the honey, right? Right? So he says it's still, honey is called like fruit juice, so it doesn't really leaven. So, in other words, the honey won't leaven the flour, so then what's the problem? What's what the Bet Yosef is saying. But it says, so now what are you going to tell me, right? Maybe they also put water in there, as well, in the honey, right? They added water too. They watered it down, right? Okay. So then what, right? And then if you have, fruit juice with water, does leaven. But it says Bet Yosef, nevertheless, right? We shouldn't forbid this, he says. Why is that? So it says it's very far-fetched, to say they also put flour in there and also they put water in there. Oh, that's already like far-fetched, to say such a thing like that. It says we don't go out of our way, to be stringent so much like that. To say, maybe they put both of them. But he says, that to be concerned that maybe he put in there fine flour, as we said, right? So he says it could be that the fine flour, that we assume that it's chametz, gamur. It's like real chametz. Why? So exactly what I told you, right? Because they baste the wheat with water, right? When they make the fine flour. Kulam techina. Like it says in this book, Siman Kuf Yutet, Abar Rosh, but the Rosh says it's Katav, the Tshuva Klal Kaf Dalet, right? The Rosh says in the Tshuva, Davash bePesach lo raiti adam noheg bo isuru. But the Rosh says, right, I never saw anybody who was stringent about honey, right, on Passover, right? It says, I never saw that. Mishum chashasha de eruv kemach, because, we're concerned that maybe they put some flour in there. The lo shchicha, because he says, why? It's not very common, that they do that, to put flour in the honey. V'gam nitbatel kodam Pesach. He says also gets nullified, right, before Passover. That's also another reason. So, obviously they didn't do it on Passover, right? You bought it before Passover, right? Whatever, So they didn't make it on Passover. Right? Most of the time, that's not the way it is. When you go to the store, right, and you buy something, obviously, it wasn't made on Passover. It was made a month before, maybe, right? Whatever, something like that, right? So, we're not worried about that. The gam b'tibatel kodam Pesach ve'im banu lesor dabash. So it says if we're going to come, and forbid the honey, right? Mishum chashash tarobet, because we're afraid, that they mix something in there. Nesor oto gam kol hashana. It says then they should also forbid it all year round. Why is that? Because some say also that they put also like meat in there, in the honey, right? And then it turns into honey. Rabbeinu Yonah katav, since Rabbeinu Yonah said, "Shafilu notnim bo basar nevela." He says even if they put non-kosher meat in there, he says, "Keman denimuach v'nitapech lidvash." Since it melted, right, and turned into honey, it says mutar. It's allowed. Wow, can you imagine? Right, the batar hashtag and the share. So it's because we go according to what it is now. So in other words, Rabbeinu Yonah is telling you, right, that since it changed form already, and became like honey itself, that meat that they put in there, so therefore it's already kosher. Oh my God, right? So who's saying this, by the way? The Rosh is bringing Rabbeinu Yonah, right? It's quoting him, and he also seems to agree. So there you go, right? So therefore, the rule is, right, that honey, we're not concerned about it. And by the way, you see from here also another rule, which is that really, like food on Passover does not really require hechsher, you just have to know what you're buying. You know what I mean? You have to know what it is. You have to know the rules, ask a rabbi, who knows the stuff, he'll tell you what to do, what not to do, right? What to buy, what not to buy, right? Like, things like, for instance, sugar and, right, and salt, they don't need a hechsher, these things, or like tea bags, whatever, things like that. They don't need a hechsher. Don't waste your time, right? Looking for hechsher for these things. Right? You don't need that. There's no reason for it. Because the goyim don't add anything, to these things. You know what I mean? So they put some preservatives in there, but it's not really a problem. Sometimes they put preservatives. They're not chametz, these preservatives. So they're okay. Whatever. Right? It's all good. Right? So if you're not sure, right? Ask a good rabbi who knows this stuff. He'll tell you what to do. Right? There are some rabbis, by the way, don't know their stuff. They'll tell you, hey, everything needs a hechsher. They think that they know what they're talking about. They don't know nothing, these people. That's the truth. They never learned halacha in their life. So,
well,
they know.
The first time I ever heard that there's something like, you can take a pig, unkosher slaughtered because no Jew would touch it, so even slaughter it and huntify it somehow, and it becomes kosher. That I don't get. I'm still kind of baffled by that whole.
Right, it's baffling. Yes, it is baffling. But we're not talking about that. It's totally like pig. We're talking about it's a mixture. But the point is like this. That there is a rule like this in halacha that when something is not kosher, right, and it has been altered to a different form, it loses its non-kosher status. Right, so this is what we're talking about here. This is it's a halakhic concept. By the way, I posted about this, several times in halakha, certain things, that in kashrut, I posted about this already several times. I'll give an example, right? For instance, there are some like you buy, some capsules, right? That contain all kinds of things inside there, right? God knows what, right? Whatever they are, right? For health, whatever. And the capsules are made out of like pigs, ligament of pigs, right? So it's allowed to have those capsules to swallow them because they've already changed form. They've been transformed already. So it's not like you're eating the ligament of the pig. It's already been chemically transformed. And all whenever it's altered, so it doesn't retain its status anymore, right? It's a similar concept to what we're saying here. There's many things like that in halakha, by the way. You should know. Ask your local posek, right? He'll tell you, right? He'll tell you about those things if he knows, if he learned about it, right? I'm not talking about these kiruv rabbis, by the way. On Facebook, these kiruv guys, they don't know nothing in halakha, So don't bother asking them, You have to be trained in halakha, I mean, you cannot just be a kiruv rabbi, and paskin halachot. You cannot do that.
What's kiruv?
Kiruv means, bringing people, making them more religious. These religious rabbis, make you religious. They scare you. You're gonna go to hell, right? You're gonna burn. These rabbis. I mean, don't ask them things about halacha because they don't know anything about halacha. Don't waste your time. So that's the way it is. Okay. But a posek is a posek, right? Kiruv is kiruv. It's two different things, different profession. Right, the kiruv rabbi will tell you, yeah, you'll burn in hell, if you sin, and you'll be turned into, charcoal to scare you, Those rabbis usually don't know halacha so good. Okay, so that's the way it is. What can you do, right? Unfortunately, sometimes I listen to them. I don't want to mention any names. I mean, I don't want to get now into all kinds of bashing, rabbi bashing. I don't want to bash any rabbis, but. Sometimes I listen to them, just to see what they're talking about. Like 50% of what they say is like totally wrong. Like they don't know nothing in halakha. So like why, when it comes to halakha, it's a different profession. God bless. They have their own role also. These people. They make people religious, whatever. They scare them, into becoming religious. It's good, whatever. Some people don't like that, but I remember one time, there was, I don't want to mention his name, this rabbi, right? You guys probably don't know him. It's not one of these internet rabbis, that are around today. It's from the older generation. So, I'll tell you something really funny, right? One time, this rabbi, by the way, is more of a Talmid Chacham. He's more serious. This guy, he's he has lots of knowledge, but he used to scare people like into doing teshuvah. He used the fear tactics. Right? I don't have to tell you what that is, right? Fear tactics, scare tactics, right? A lot of people don't like this stuff, but anyway, right? So there was one guy I met, when I was learning here in Queens, and I told him, I said, do you know this rabbi? I don't want to mention his name. You probably don't know him anyway, but anyway, right? So he says, yeah, he says, he made me religious. He says, he says, I was secular, the Israeli guy tells me, this Israeli guy. He says, yeah, it made me religious. He says, but I can't. He says, I hate his guts. He says, he tells me. I was like, well, if he made you religious, why do you hate his guts? So he tells me, he says, because you scared the wits out of me. So go figure, right? That's the. What can you do, right? That's I mean, such is life. What can you do? Okay, it was funny when I heard that. I was cracking up. Okay, right. So anyway,
growing pains.
No pain, no gain, right? Okay. So let's go to Shulchan Aruch, right? Let's see what's going on there. So it says, right, the Shulchan Aruch here, דבש של אינו יהודי, אין מחזיקים בו איסור, right? So as we said, right, when it comes to the honey of the goyim, we don't assume that there's anything forbidden in there, you know? ואוכלים אותו בפסח. So we eat it for Passover, right? Even though it has no OU, no OK, right? No nothing, right? Kosher for Passover doesn't say that, right? But you're allowed to have it anyway, right? Because that's the halakha, you know? Halakha doesn't, you know, never require a hechsher for anything. You know, except, by the way, there's one thing it requires hechsher, you know, when it comes to meat, right? Things like this, you know, because it requires to be slaughtered properly and all kinds of things, you know. So there you do require, you know. But here we're talking about, right? But even then, by the way, you know, even for meat, by the way, if the meat was slaughtered by somebody who's a religious Jew, you know, you don't need a hechsher for that. You can trust him, you know. You know, he's a religious guy, you know, he keeps mitzvot, he keeps Shabbat, right? So that's good, fine, you know, it's good, you can eat it, right? No problem. So anyway, right, it says the Ramah here. So the Ramah says, right, but there are those who are stringent also, as we saw, right? והמנהג במדינות אלו שלא לאכול דבש, רק אותו שמביאים בחביות מן הכוורת, שעושים ממנו משקה שקוראים מעד, right? So it says the Ramah, but in the Ashkenazi countries, he says, right, the custom is to be stringent about this. And they only eat the stuff which comes from the honeycomb, right? And they make this drink out of it, right, which is called mad, some kind of like a liquor, you know, that they make from the honey. Okay, so the Ashkenazim are, by the way, are much more stringent when it comes to Passover in many areas of halacha, which we've already seen, right? When it comes to kitniot, you know, legumes and right, and matzah shira, right, the fruit juice, things like this, right? They have lots of stringencies, by the way, the Ashkenazim, you know, in Passover. So this is also one of them, right? Now he goes on here, the Ramah. ותנים יבשים וענבים יבשים שקוראים רוז'יני, רק גדולים או קטנים, תלוי במנהג המקומות, כי יש מחמירים שלא לאכולן אש מקנין. לכן נהגו במדינות אלו, so he says, therefore the custom is, להחמיר שלא לאכול שום פירות יבשים. Right, so another stringency that the Ashkenazim have is that they don't eat dried fruits, right, for Passover. They don't eat dried fruits. We, by the way, the Sephardim, we do. So what does that mean? Without a hechsher, you know, we eat it, right? Unless, you know something has flour in there, right? Whatever, that's a different story. So unless we know for sure, right, that it was made well. In other words, you need somebody you need a hechsher or, you know, somebody to testify, right, that it was made properly. But sukkar asur le'ochlo afilu le'ashoto asur, right? So he says also sugar, you know, the Ashkenazim were also stringent about that as well. Nowadays, by the way, you know, they do eat sugar, the Ashkenazim, but, you know, they have a hechsher on it. So, you know, that's why, you know, they rely on it. I mean, but also, by the way, you know, there are some also other groups that don't eat sugar on Passover. But nowadays, by the way, there's really no concern. You know, in the old days, there was really much more of a concern there. So he says the last day of Passover, says we do eat dried fruits, right? When there's no concern about, right, about leavening there. Right? Or naglich, right? So he says also by us, the Ashkenazim, they don't eat, right, the spice, you know, saffron, right? Saffron. They don't eat saffron. Or naglich, right? What is naglich? So it says, but they don't forbid a mixture, you know, in the mixture it's okay. So the question is, right, what is naglich? Maybe the Mishnah Berurah explains, right? If we get lucky, let's see if we get lucky. He explains what this is. Right, so he says, right, I don't know exactly what it is, but he says they soak it in water that comes from barley, right? You know, like juice, whatever, right? Before they dry it. So in other words, there are certain things, as we said, right? The Ashkenazim are stringent about. So we just got like a good whiff of, you know, all that stuff, right? That they're stringent about these things. Like they used to say, the Ashkenazim from Europe, it says they used to say all we had on Passover but was basically, meat, potatoes, and eggs, right? That's all they ate pretty much. Everything else was forbidden. So they didn't really have much of a choice for their diet, in Europe. They were very, very limited, the Ashkenazim. By the way, they also had problems with dairy. They didn't eat dairy either. Nowadays they do eat dairy. But in those days they were not eating dairy either. There was all kinds of stringencies that they had over there in Europe, right? All kinds of things. So anyway, right, that's a story. But the Ashkenazim, what they do is, right, to avoid all these problems, they buy everything with a hechsher, So this way, right, we know it was made with the proper way, without any mixtures. So if you get something with a hechsher, even for Ashkenazi, right, you can avoid all these problems. You know what I mean? That's what they do. Right? Okay. All right. Whatever. That's the story. Okay, so I guess we'll stop there. Very good. Right, thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. B'ezrat Hashem. We'll see you tomorrow. Right? And Laila Tov, Chazak u'Baruch.
Kavod harav. Thank you so much.
God bless. We're getting close to Purim, right? B'ezrat Hashem. So get everything ready.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
God bless.